The gentleman from California, Mr. Whitesides.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Secretary. Thank you for your service to the country. I'm a new member of Congress from the north side of Los Angeles, and I'm proud to represent a region with both a large veteran community and a world-class aerospace production base. It was our area that broke the speed of sound for the first time, that assembled the space shuttles, and that now builds many of the most advanced aircraft that this nation depends on for its national security. I want to start by communicating my deep concern for the deployment of military troops to the streets of Los Angeles County. Over the past few days, I've received briefings from military leadership, including the Marine Corps and the National Guard, and one thing is eminently clear. So far, this operation has been poorly planned and poorly executed, and is not an example of the operational and logistical excellence that the Department of Defense is famous for. Our service members have been sleeping on the concrete floors of federal buildings and even outside on roads. No contract has been made to feed them or adequately house them. NORTHCOM was not given adequate time or resources to prepare to absorb these Guard units. The lines of command are muddy at best. I've personally heard that NORTHCOM is the lead agency, the DHS is the lead agency, that the FBI is the lead agency, or that your office, Mr. Secretary, is the lead agency. It's unclear whether the Marines who have been deployed have even completed their full training for this civilian-focused, non-lethal mission. The briefings that we have received to date indicate that only a fraction of the assigned forces are actually being utilized on a day-to-day basis. On top of this, yesterday we heard in your testimony, Mr. Secretary, that the Department may start sending troops to other cities and states. And early today, you refused to say whether you would follow the decision of the Supreme Court on the legality of the deployments of the National Guard and the Marines. We're on an extraordinarily dangerous path. The nation's founding fathers were rightfully deeply skeptical of domestic deployment of federal troops. That skepticism stretches all the way back to the Boston Massacre and is a skepticism based on blood. Going forward, I would urge you to avoid politics and to actually pay attention to what law enforcement officers are saying on the ground. Now, we've talked a lot today about leadership and accountability. I've been lucky to work for several inspiring leaders. When I was NASA Chief of Staff, my boss was Administrator Charlie Bolden, who you may know, served as a decorated Marine general, as well as a space shuttle commander. This was a Marine who flew more than 100 combat missions in North and South Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. He commanded the mission which deployed the Hubble Space Telescope, which at the time was the largest object ever deployed by the shuttle. He's a serious man and an American hero. I haven't been a member of the Armed Services Committee for very long, just over 5 months, but in that time I've had the privilege to meet and talk with the senior-most members of our military. I've met men and women who've served for decades in our armed services, who've served for years in combat zones. What have I learned from these American heroes? Leaders don't just speak, they listen. They are strong, but they show humility. They are curious, and they learn from all members of their team, even people that they disagree with. You and your team have made multiple serious errors, putting our pilots and troops at risk by disclosing operational details in unclassified communication channels, firing general officers with unique experience and leadership skills, hiring senior team members who seem to be unable to work together well and who seem unable to hold confidential information private. We need the Department of Defense to be run well so that our troops are led well and our nation is protected. In order for that to happen, Mr. Secretary, I suspect you will need to listen more and talk less. You will need to be more curious and capable of learning from different voices. I know that that is not the style of this administration, but you now have the lives of millions of service members and hundreds of millions of Americans depending on your capacity to learn and change. I sincerely hope you can do it, and I yield back my time.
Chair, I recognize the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Vasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I understand that the border is a top priority for you and the Department of Defense. Well, it's also one of my top priorities in my border district. That's why I've introduced bipartisan legislation to stop fentanyl at the border, secure our ports of entry, hire more CBP personnel, and combat the cartels, areas that I'm sure we agree on. Now, DOD has spent more than $525 million from the defense budget on military operations on the border. You've done it by diverting over $1 billion from military modernization and quality of life programs like housing. And as such, I'm sure you're well informed as to what your warfighters are doing on our border and the characteristics of the border itself. Secretary Hegseth, do you know how many border miles there are in New Mexico?
Not the exact number of miles.
Can you give me a round figure?
Hundreds.
Okay, 180 miles. Can you tell me where the border wall starts and ends on this map of New Mexico?
I'm not properly oriented to your map, but I know that unfortunately, because of the administration previous, they did not have the opportunity to finish the border wall.
Thank you,
let it rust
Secretary.
on the ground instead of
Thank you,
putting it up,
Secretary. And you have been
defending
to
our
New
border.
Mexico. Could you tell me where in New Mexico you've been to?
I've been to the border twice to look at once at our national defense area down there because I can't recall a time when a Secretary of Defense has gone down in the first 4 or 5 months of his tenure to the border to better understand.
Was that in
the
an urban
situation
area
there.
or in a rural area?
Both areas, traversed rural areas and urban
Okay,
areas.
so you must be
Some
familiar.
with walls, some without.
Secretary.
And if President Trump was actually supported, we'd have a
Thank
border
you, Secretary. I reclaim my time. So the most remote part of New Mexico is called the Boot Heel. And I'm not sure that you spent any time in the Boot Heel of New Mexico. Mr. Secretary, I was raised on the border. I've lived there my whole life. I've worked alongside ranchers, farmers, landowners, wildlife biologists, and other stakeholders for over a decade. I headed a border security task force in my district before coming to Congress. I've traveled with Border Patrol on ATVs. I've hunted the border on horseback and hiked dozens of miles in the most remote stretches of the border in this region. Now, do you happen to know why there hasn't been a border wall built in the Boot Heel?
Well, based on what you just described, you should be a big fan of what our administration is
Well,
undertaking.
Secretary, I'm asking why a border wall has not been built. Funds have been allocated for other parts of the border. but
Here's
not
what I
here.
know. Our commanders on the ground and others and our engineers would understand what goes where and why, and where there should be a border wall, there will be a border wall.
Okay,
It will be
Secretary-
funded through reconciliation.
Secretary,
because
are you
President Trump
familiar with the
is gonna
Animas
deliver on
Mountains,
it.
with Alamo Waco, with San Luis Mountains, with Guadalupe Pass or Long Canyon?
Again,
Critical border areas.
I'm aware that there are gaps in different places where walls are not as effective as other places, and I get that.
Thank
We're
you,
applying
Secretary.
infrastructure
I appreciate your
where
answer
it
on that.
makes the most sense because
Thank
we're
you.
going to get 100% operational
Thank you,
control of the border.
Secretary. So you agree then that a border wall doesn't make sense for the entire country?
I think we need a border wall across our entire border.
Okay, so you should know then why it's almost physically impossible to build a border across the Animas Mountains and the terrain challenges that poses and the billions of dollars. Do you know if there's roads on those mountains currently?
If we're going to spend money as a government,
Okay.
it should be
I'll take that as a
to
no.
secure our southern
Well,
border.
the point I'm trying to make, Secretary, is that if this is so important to the military, and you as Secretary of the Department of Defense should know more about the border. Mr. Secretary, I urge you to skip the photo ops next time that you go to a port of entry and spend time on the ground in places like the Diamond Day Ranch.
I think you should ask the soldiers on the border whether they've been photo op visits or not, because I spent a lot
Secretary-
of time on the ground
Secretary,
with
are
the
you-
soldiers, getting an understanding of what
Secretary,
they're
I'm
facing,
gonna
what
ask
they're
you a
doing,
question
what
that-
their capabilities are.
Secretary, I reclaim
not
my
for
time.
a photo op.
Thank you.
As a
Secretary, I
Secretary of
reclaim my
Defense, to
time.
understand what our
Chairman,
troops
may I
do
reclaim my
and
time?
why.
Gentleman
they
reclaims
do it.
his time.
Thank you. Secretary, do you know what a tethered aerostat system is?
I do.
Okay. Well, great. Then you know that this type of surveillance technology is superior to having thousands of troops sitting in trucks looking at an empty desert. I've requested funds for more tethered aerostat systems. We haven't had a response from your department. Are you familiar with ASTs?
What's an AST?
Well, it's an autonomous surveillance tower. They're equipped with these advanced cameras that have the capability to relay critical information to border agents on the ground. And this type of technology is badly needed on the Boot Heel. And it's a much better expenditure than a border wall is.
I've seen that. I've seen those towers in use.
Great. Well, these technologies have been described to me by both Border Patrol and CBP as force multipliers, allowing their personnel to focus on law enforcement efforts while leaving this mundane surveillance task to much more efficient and cost-effective technology, a much more efficient way to surveil that part of the border. Now, Mr. Secretary, I have serious concerns with your fundamental lack of knowledge about the U.S.-Mexico border, considering the billions of dollars that DOD is slated to spend on this mission, with little clarity to those of us who live there. I would encourage you to do some homework on my region and learn what will actually make our border more secure and more safe. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair